Okay, here's a second rebuttal. Does the Quran confirm the Bible? And we're actually continuing with the arguments that the Christians make. So we'll read what they actually say, and then what we'll do is we'll actually respond to them. I've responded to them, so I just want to present this now in a video format. A Christian wrote, he said, I'm a bit confused on the issue. The Tanakh and the New Testament existed in canonical form long before 7th century Arabia. So the claim that they didn't or exist in some altered form would seem to put the author of the Quran in a state of ignorance. Also, there is a division in Islamic scholarship on the issue. Many confirm the text has been preserved, and he cites Ali Atay here. And I said to him, Ali Atay is actually a Shia Muslim, and we don't accept his theology and his understanding on the Quran, because obviously he doesn't actually accept the Sunni hadiths. If he's a Shia, he's not going to accept that part of the theology, where it actually says that certain verses were lost throughout the Old and New Testament, and certain verses were not preserved, and Allah also says that they forgot a good portion of it. The Christian then says that's an ad hominem. He cited data. Well, he could cite anything he wants. We cite much more better material. In fact, I've actually advised him to watch the first part of the rebuttal, where we actually showed even in the 4th century there was canonical differences. Even before the 7th century, Sam Shimon is Sam Shimon is actually offended by this, and that's why he wants to debate us on this topic. But when I called him to debate me on this very topic, instead of debating textual criticism of the Quran, he's backing out. I mean, Christians are afraid to face the reality that the Quran doesn't say that the Bible that we have today is fully preserved. The Christian then wrote back and said, but for your purpose, that doesn't matter. It clearly existed in canonical form before the 7th century when the Quran was authored, and the text is well preserved as the Masoretic tradition clearly attests to. He said, you as well. I said to him, it may have existed in canonical form, but according to whose canon? There were many canons, not just one, that was agreed upon. And no, you can actually watch my video below. You can see that the Bible wasn't preserved very well. There are many textual variances within the actual manuscripts themselves that actually affect the message and the meaning of those verses. Again, refer to my video where I show this in my article responses and in my video responses. Have a listen to my video, it's below this one. He then says, well, for the purpose of Quranic interpretation, given the injeel doesn't include the entire New Testament, the only question of the canon is with respect to the gospel. And he says, he then says it's 2nd century. 2nd century isn't really early. That's, over 100 years later, and there are 3rd century manuscripts even accepted within the New Testament. There are manuscripts that are accepted 250 years later. This isn't early. And watch my video again. The Quran doesn't say which canon was the true version. There is not a single number on the books that the Quran says. The Christian then says, right, it doesn't refer to canon at all. He's referring to the Quran when speaking of the Bible. He says, it says gospel and Torah. There's never been any dispute about what these terms mean. Well, obviously, there isn't a dispute on what those terms mean, but there is a dispute on what they actually consist of. For example, Sam Shimon says in his article that the real canon is only 66 books, and that's even before Muhammad. He can't even say this. This is subjective, as there were canons that exceeded that amount. And we've actually shown it even in the 4th century Bible, the Codex Sinaiticus, that has the extra books in the New Testament, 29 books instead of the 27. The Christian then says, again, to my knowledge, the canon isn't addressed in the Quran. Well, exactly. More specific, Torah and the Injeel. The canon could be 5 or 500 books. That wouldn't change the Injeel or Torah. Of course, it changes the Injeel of the Torah because we don't know then what the Injeel and the Torah is. You can't say the Injeel is preserved within 66 books. You can't say that if there is a difference of opinion, each Christian group and sect arguing what is the Injeel. And that's what the Quran says. The Quran says that they've forgotten much of it and they're basically in conjecture and it hasn't been preserved. They don't know. They can't point to a specific canon and say 100% this is the most accurate canon, and within that canon these are the most accurate verses, when even the verses themselves are disputed. So even if you want to claim, oh, we have a canon, well, it's still disputed. The verses within it is disputed. So how can you say that the Quran has affirmed the Bible, the uncorrupt Bible? It doesn't make sense, because uncorrupt can mean that you can't even decide upon what it is, because there's so many fraudulent fabrications, additions added to it, you can't even work out what it is. And then the Christian says, I think he says, I think I'm talking about what the Quran says and you're talking about what Shimon says. We're talking about different things. Not really. I said, it's worse if we talk about what the Quran says, because Allah says we revealed the Injeel to Isa and not Paul. Now the Christian says, nobody has claimed Paul is the author of the gospel. And what is the etymology of Isa? I've always wondered that. My response is, the Bible is made up of 40 authors, and that's what I'm told from Christian apologists. And Paul happens to actually be one of them. You know, Christians like to say, oh, the Bible has 40 witnesses and so forth. He says, correct, but you said revealed the Injil to Isa, then you mentioned Paul. And my response is, yes, because what you have isn't just what was revealed to Jesus directly from God. Rather, you have the accounts and personal witnesses, accounts of men. The Christian replies back and says, but in talking about the Gospels, they are of course concerned with Jesus. He himself is the direct revelation as God incarnate, Mark 1, John 1. And my response is, not exactly. Let me show you. For example, there's a Christian apologist named Matt Slick, and he says, are the 4 Gospels first-hand eyewitnesses? And Matt Slick says no, he disputes this. Even Matt Slick, a Christian apologist, disputes whether they are first eyewitnesses, meaning, you know, it was inspired directly by God to them and they were an eyewitness to it. He said, I don't deal with most Christian apologists. So notice when he brought Ali Atay up, and I said, oh, he's a Shia and he doesn't really accept Islamic theology, he says, oh, that's ad hominem, it's not right that you don't deal with his arguments and whatever, and we shouldn't discredit him. But then when I post Matt Slick to him, he says, I don't deal with most Christian apologists, I deal with biblical scholars. Well, is Ali Atay a Quranic scholar? No, but you're more than happy to cite Ali Atay. And then I said to him, I don't just show Matt Slick, but biblical examples. And I showed him an example, for example, in my article, where in the book of Matthew, it mentions, and set upon over his head is accusation written, this is Jesus, the King of the Jews. Now, when you read Mark's narration on the same inscription, it's different. It says, the King of the Jews. You read Luke's transition, 23:38, it says, this is the King of the Jews. You read John's narration, and it says, this is Jesus of Nazareth, the King of the Jews. So, although it's talking about the King of the Jews, but they're worded in a different way. But the problem here is, this is what apparently the witnesses saw inscribed on their head. I mean, you're not going to have 4 different inscriptions that have different words. It's going to be one inscription written. Obviously, the Jews didn't write it in 4 different ways. They've written it in one way. Unless Jesus has a forehead bigger than an elephant, I don't know. So the inscription is only one, yet the Bible gives 4 different wordings, sentences to that inscription. And the question then is, is this directly revealed by God? No, this is the personal account of a witness who saw it. So it's not a direct revelation from God. He says, you're steering the conversation towards eyewitness accounts, which is quite far from the initial discussion of what constitutes the Torah and injeel. I said, not what God told him was inscribed. It's not steering away from eyewitness accounts. We are showing that there is a difference between claiming that Jesus accepted the injeel, a direct revelation from Allah, teaching him the gospel, or what the Christians show within their Bibles. They do have the words of Jesus, what he heard from God, yes, but it's contaminated with other things, other eyewitnesses and other accounts. And you can't turn around and now conflate and say, oh, Allah revealed the injeel to Jesus, yet we have other authors of the Bible and contributing to what apparently the injeel is. And then a Christian turns around and say, oh, look, this is the injeel. The book that we have, the Bible, that is the injeel. But hang on a minute. If you want to be consistent, Allah says he gave the injeel to Jesus. He didn't say he gave the injeel to the scribes. And even in the scribes, you have different accounts. They're only personal eyewitnesses giving their own testimonies. It's not coming directly from God, because if it did, then they would all have said what was written on Jesus is exactly the same wording. He then says, you're steering the conversation again far from the initial discussion of what constitutes the Torah and the Injil. And I said to him, so you agree that the whole Injil is not what Allah revealed, but it adds a non-Injil, i.e. eyewitness testimony. The Christian then says, revealed is different in the Christian and Islamic view. And I said to him, we are talking about the Quranic view on the Injil. So I don't know what you're doing talking about the Christian view on the Injil is, because, you want to conflate and explain to us what the actual Injil is. So that's it basically. So that ends the second part of the rebuttal.